This morning for our satsang, I wanted to discuss a little bit with you some Hindu wisdom about family and life in the family, what family life means in our tradition, and some of the central values that have informed our thinking in our sacred texts, in our shastras about family life. But I want to begin with two verses from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, where Sri Krishna speaks about a divine family and how the divine sees himself or herself in relation to us. So these are verses 17 and 18 from the 9th chapter. So this is where I begin this morning. Verses of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna chooses to speak about his relationship with the creation using the analogy of family, which is really fascinating and revealing. So, Pita ham asya jagato, I am the Pita, I am the father of the universe, but also the mother. Mata. So I am father and mother of the universe. Pitamaha. Also the grandfather or the great grandfather of the universe. In other words, I am the only source. I am the single source, the single origin of all things. The first single parent. Family. The divine is the first single parent family. Pita hamasya jagata, mata dhata pita maha. So by using the example of the family, using the model of the human family to describe God's relationship with the universe, I think speaks to us in at least two important ways. One is descriptive, it's a statement about the origin of the universe and the fact that the universe has a divine intelligent source who's the beginning of all things. So it's a factual, descriptive statement, but one which, by the use of which, I would like to say that he elevates the significance of the family. By using the model of the family to speak about divine relationship with the world is an elevation of the significance of family in our lives. But the second important point about the fact that he uses this example is that it is also more than just descriptive. It is more than a statement about the origin of all things. It's a statement about relationship. So when we ourselves say, I am your father, or I am your mother, or I am your great grandfather, we are certainly making a descriptive statement, but that statement also has a relational or an affective dimension. I'm describing also what you mean to me, how I see you, how I perceive you, how I value you, and perhaps that is as important or even more important than the mere descriptive dimension of Sri Krishna's statement here in the Bhagavad Gita, because we know also, and I'll come to that, the teaching in one of our Upanishads that the entire universe or the entire world constitutes a single family, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the singleness of the universe as the family of the divine. And I want to get to that in a moment. But the question for us is, what is it? What do we mean when we speak of family? And there are two ways in which I want to address this. In a very traditional or conventional sense of the word, we define family by the fact of some common ancestry or some common relationship. And this will include an adopted family as well. There's some common point of reference or origin. So we choose to describe ourselves as a family by the fact of having a common parent. So I would describe my relationship or someone as my brother or sister, and this points to a common parent, a shared parent, adoptive or biological. So a common ancestor becomes the reference point, the center for a large network of human relationships that we would consider to be family. So, and what is interesting is that the further back we go in identifying that ancestor, the larger the family becomes. So if I define family as we say today, the nuclear family. The nuclear family is the mom, the dad, and the immediate children. And that has been growing in importance with some unfortunate effects also. So if I define the meaning of the family in the more contemporary sense of the nuclear family, then I give primary value or primary importance to my sisters and brothers with whom I share a common parent. But let I say that I look back and say, well, the common ancestor, the common ancestors are my grandparents. Then it begins to grow. Right? My family becomes larger. Those that I include within the circle of my family will naturally begin to grow, because then I have uncles, and I have aunts, and I have nephews and nieces, and so on, and so forth. So the further back we go, the larger becomes the family unit. And so this connects well with where I started. And if we go back to the divine as a common point of origin, then the universe becomes the human or the living family. There's no one excluded. There's no one who's not included. So this is the first way of speaking about the meaning of family, and this is family defined with reference to a common ancestor or ancestors. And it is important, but it's a limited way of understanding what traditionally constituted a family in our Hindu tradition. So common ancestry is a definition of family. Forgetting for a moment, adopted child. Definition of family on the basis of a biological fact. It points to a common gene pool that we share on the basis of common parents, common genetic pool. But this gene pool, or this common biological fact of facts, is not one as far as we don't choose it consciously. Now, from a moment, we're not speaking about matters of karma, but at least we don't choose consciously the families into which we are born. It's a fact of biology, it's a fact of birth. So this is a statement of fact. But this statement of fact doesn't tell us what it means to be family. So that I am born into a family, the Janma. So there is a Janma Parivar, the family of my birth. But what does it mean to be a member of a family, to belong to a family? What are the values? And I would refer to those values as the Dharma Parivar. So there is the Janma Parivar, which would be the family into which I am born and where I am connected, or I share common genetic pool. That's primary, that's basic. But what does it mean to be a family is the question of Dharma. The Dharma Parivar, the Janma Parivar, the birth family, and the family that we make, the family that we build, is the Dharma Parivar. In a sense, not unlike, I'm a citizen of the United States by the fact of birth. What does it mean to be a citizen? What are the values? How do I define the meaning of it? It's not something that we often think about. In the same way, family, we sort of fall back onto the Janma Parivar. We don't often ask, what is the Dharma Parivar? What is the family that we build? What is the family that we make? What is it that is more than common genes? So, to answer this question, I think we can look at the word that I just used, which is in Sanskrit, the word for family is parivar. Parivar is family. And it's a very, like most Sanskrit nouns, this word also has a Sanskrit root, a verb. So the root, the verbal root of parivar is parivra. And from that verb you get the noun parivar. But the root meaning of parivra is twofold. It has two meanings. And so we get from this word what is the understanding of family. And the first is to protect. Parivra means to protect. And secondly, to embrace. So these are the two meanings of parivra: to protect, to embrace. So a parivar, therefore, the family, the noun, is a relationship in which a person is protected and in which a person is embraced. And the two are very important and complementary to each other. So, taking the first meaning of parivar, to protect, certainly, we can think of the family as a place where a child, biological or adopted, a child is protected, which refers to the nurturing process, the provision of all of the vital needs that a child requires for him or for her to grow and to realize his or her potential. Includes, of course, all of the material needs, the opportunity for education, for health care, for food, for shelter, would all be included in the notion of to protect. And that includes also a physical space. When we think of the first dimension, to protect a shared physical space. But the second meaning of parivar is equally important, which is at all stages, if the family was a relationship only in which, and this is, I'm not underestimating the significance of, providing and all of the material necessities that a child requires for his or her sustenance and growth. I'm not by no means, minimizing the significance of that. But certainly, a child also needs the emotional nurturing, right? The embrace. Parivar is a place, is a relationship of embrace. A child doesn't grow without love, without a loving relationship, in the family. So the family as a place of love and embrace is as important as the family as a place of shelter and protection. And the second dimension of parivar becomes even more important for us today, living in the United States, or of course living in India, wherever we live, where we no longer live in joint families. Traditionally, the Hindu family was a joint family where several generations lived under the same roof. At least the sons and their families lived with their parents. But now, as I said at the beginning, the nuclear family is becoming more common. But the family as a relationship of embrace, the family as a relationship of love never ends. Even when the physical circumstances change, even when we no longer share a common physical home, the family as a relationship of love is the most enduring part of the family. And in a very interesting way, it reverses itself. And this is why these two dimensions are so important. So in the early life of a child, the responsibility for the first meaning of parivar, to protect and to provide, falls entirely on the shoulders of the parents. So the child is primarily a receiver of the parents' protection and the parent as a provider. But as we grow old as parents, and of course, the love is always there, the embrace is always present. But as we grow older as children, we become the providers in many ways. It's a circle that begins to change, because we need care as we grow older. We need help, often physical, help, which our children, if they are close to us, they are certainly part of the provision of that kind of help. And the continuous, unchanging dimension of the relationship is the relationship of love. Even when who is the provider, who is the giver, at least sometimes the balance changes as one ages, but there's something that is steady and important, and that is the meaning of parivar as a relationship of love. There's never a time when that shouldn't change. So that the point I want to emphasize is that one can be a family without sharing a common physical space, as long as the relationship of love, is a sustaining and vitally present in that relationship, and that's sustaining that is the process of transforming. It requires work to do that. But that is the process of transforming the Janma Parivar into the Dharma Parivar. Taking what you have as a fact of birth and building something that is sustaining and lifelong and nourishing. And that can't be taken for granted. It requires conscious, mindful work, both on the part of parent and increasingly on the part of the child as well. Because relationships have to be mutual, And a true embrace is something that is given by both in the relationship. If someone comes to shake my hand and I don't put my hand out, it is not a handshake. If I want to shake someone's hands, the hands of someone, I have to give my hands also. So it has to be mutual. So the Dharma Parivar, the building of the Dharma Parivar, is a responsibility of both parent and child, especially as the child grows older. And you can see, even in the verses of the Bhagavad Gita that I have cited, he begins by speaking of himself as Pita, as the father of the universe, Mata, Dhata, supporter, provider, Pitamaha, the great-grandfather. But in the next verse he says, I am the friend, Suhrit. Gatir Bharta Prabhu Sakshi Nivasa. I am the abode of love, the place of shelter, not physical, place of emotional shelter. Suhrit, friend. So even Sri Krishna in these verses, he begins, I see it as, emphasizing first the dimension of the family as protecting, but then moving to speak much more of the family as exemplifying a certain quality of relationship. And friend is interesting, Suhrit, because later on as a parent, I think that the relationship changes and it matures when you become a Suhrit with your child. There is a real possibility of developing that relationship of intimate friendship with one's children. And that doesn't mean loss of mutual respect, but certainly, it changes your role from that of provider to deepening then the bond of embrace. And friendship is one description of that bond of embrace. So he himself switches the language as he describes here. So with that background in the Bhagavad Gita, I want to give 3 examples. I change the text and look at the Ramayana and the examples that I am giving come from the Ramcharitmanas. There are many versions of the Ramayana, as you know the original Sanskrit written by the poet Valmiki. He first told the story of Ram in Sanskrit, and then we have all of the regional versions of the Ramayana that came later on, Bengali, Tamil, and then we have also and each one has its own name, although they all tell the story of Sri Ram, but they do so in their own unique way, reflecting their own times, reflecting the particular cultural traditions of their time and place. So the one I'm drawing from is written by Tulsidas in the 15th century. And the beauty of the Tulsidas text is to be found in the fact that, first of all, he wrote his text in rhyming couplets, in poetic rhyming verses, in the verses of Doha and Chaupai, two verses and four verses, which made the text very attractive musically. It was a very brilliant achievement by Tulsidas. And secondly, he wrote the text in the language of the people. Valmiki wrote in Sanskrit, Tulsidas wrote in a Hindi dialect, Awadhi, to make the story of Ram accessible. And it's interesting at the beginning of the text how much he labors to explain what he's doing with language, and he's anticipating all the criticisms that he will get, that he's writing a sacred story in the ordinary language of the villagers and the language of the community. But, so almost 500 years, his work has endured and kept also the life narrative of Sri Ram alive. So I want to use example of, because the Ramayana is also it's a story of family. It's a narrative about family relationships, and we see exemplified here also both the wisdom of what it means to be a family, but also very good examples of what can disrupt and what can fragment, and those kinds of attitudes that are negative for family. So you are familiar, most of you are familiar with the life narrative of the Ramayana and with the decision of the king. So the Ramayana is set in the North Indian city of Ayodhya, and the decision of the king is to appoint his eldest son, Sri Ram, as his successor, to sit on his throne. So he made this announcement that his son Ram would succeed him on the throne, and everyone was very happy. The news spread very quickly. The citizens were looking forward to this. The gurus were also happy, the teachers, and the family guru, the family teacher Vashishta, came to tell Sri Ram that his father had chosen him to be the king. Now, it is really fascinating in this Tulsidas text that he chose, when the guru came to visit Ram and to tell him the news that his father had chosen him. Keep in mind that Ram had 3 brothers. There were 4 brothers: Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughan. There were 4 brothers, and he was the eldest only by a very short time, a few minutes before his brothers. But that made him the eldest and the successor to his father. So in this version of Tulsidas, the guru comes to tell him that he is going to be the king, and he has to prepare himself for the coronation. And Tulsidas says, that when he heard these words, Rama Hridaya Asabismau Bhayu, that when he heard these words, he didn't feel joy in his heart, but he was disturbed. He was troubled. bhayahu. There was a fear in him. There was an anxiety in him when he heard that he would be king. It is not what the text kinds of surprises us there by saying that the reaction of the prince was fear and anxiety, because normally, you read, you think, well, the text would say he's very happy that he was selected to be the king. And so why was he afraid? What was the source of his anxiety when he heard this news? It was not that he felt that he was not qualified or he would not be a good ruler. He was, for his life, they were being trained, as princes. They had martial training, they had training in the Shastras, Artha Shastra, the textbooks of leadership and governing. So they were all well trained and well qualified to sit on the throne. They were educated the same way. So why would he be fearful? Why would he be worried when he hears this news? And so it's very interesting. This is what, to give you a taste of the Tulsidas, poetry of Tulsidas, this is how he describes the reason that caused this prince to be trembling in his heart when he hears this news. Janme ek sang sab bhai, bhojan shayan keli larikai. Janme ek sang sab bhai, bhojan shayan keli larikai. Karan veda upavita vivaha, sang sang sab bhaye uchaha. Vimal vamsayehu anuchit eku, bandhu vivahi bade abhishek. Shri Ram Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. 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 So his anxiety, his fear was rooted in a concern for family, for parivar. So he says, Tulsidas sort of gives an indication, looks into his stream of thought. Janme ek sanga sababhai, that my brothers and I, we were all born together. Janme ek, we had one birth, just a few minutes apart. We were born together. Bhojana, we ate we shared all of our meals together. We were loving family, loving brothers. Bhojana, Shayana, we slept on the same bed. We played together. Keli Larikai. So we were born together, we ate together, we slept together, we played together. We had all of the sacraments done together, Karana Veda, our ears were pierced together. Upavita, we had the Upanayana, the sacred thread ceremonies together. And we were also married together in a single ceremony. So everything was done together. Our lives were shared completely. No one had anything done that was very different from the other. In other words, we were not distinguished from each other in any kind of special way. We lived shared lives in this family. Bimala vamsayehu anuchita eku. And he says that there's one flaw here. Vimala, there is one flaw in all of this. And what is that flaw? Bandhu vivahi bareu abhishek. That this tradition that we have that the eldest must be the king. So he sees it as a problem that I have to be distinguished from my brothers merely because of the fact that I was born a few minutes before this. And I know only one person can become the king. Only one of us can succeed. And so this worries him. It troubles him. So that's a very revealing. At the moment when someone, he has as the opportunity for the achievement, the highest achievement of his life to become the king. He's worried about the fact that what impact this would have on my relationships, on our relationships, family considerations. How would it affect? Because I can't share this with them. And would it be disruptive? Would it fragment this unity that I had with my brothers? In other words, he's concerned that it doesn't become, these relationships are not destroyed by perceptions of competitiveness or rivalry between himself and his sibling. Because this is something that can also, we've seen, in ancient history, and the rivalry within families for the throne, for power, for influence. So his relationships with his brothers seems to be more important to him than the fact of becoming the king, preserving the meaning of those relationships. And it was not, in the case of in this family, it was not one-sided, it was mutual. They all felt the same way. Ram is mirroring what his brothers felt as well. And there are so many examples of it. No one wants to prosper in ways that would adversely affect the other. So if you look at Bharat, so the story, as you know, is that his stepmother, the Ram's stepmother, on the eve of his coronation, she came forward and reminded the king, Ram's father, that he had made certain promises to her. When she was she took care of him when he was hurt in battle, and he said, I want to reward you. And she said, no, not now, but maybe some future time, I'll ask for my reward. And so on the eve of the coronation, she comes forward and reminds him that you had made this promise to me, and I'm here to redeem this promise now. And I want to redeem it in this way, that my son must be the king. Bharat must be the king. And of course, Ram must be banished. So she came and she cashed in on the promises. And it becomes a very interesting and important moment in all of the versions of the Ramayana. So now his brother, Bharat, has the opportunity to become the king. Because his father did give his word that you can cash in this promise whenever you want. So it was a question of the honor of the king's word. There's no doubt that he made the promise. So now Bharat is offered the opportunity to take Ram's place on the throne. Again, something that one would only dream about. So by this time, when the offer comes to Bharat, his father had passed away, because he couldn't. The banishment of Ram was such a traumatic experience for him that in the text he had a heart attack. He passed away. His brothers Rama and Lakshmana had already left for their exile in the forest, and so the city of Ayodhya was in a very vulnerable state without a leader. So now the Guru also goes to Bharat, Vashishta, and makes a case to him. Well, look, this is what your father wanted. Your father made this promise to fulfill, your mother's promise, and so you have to honor your father's promise. He himself, exiled Ram for the sake of his word, And Ram fulfilled his word. So now you must do the same. So this is, in the Hindu tradition, if the Guru says to do something, it comes with a lot of weight. You don't immediately say no. So Vashishta is telling him, that the king valued his word more than he valued his life. And therefore you have to take this throne. In obedience to your father is your highest good. And his mother also. Everyone was saying to him, Bharat, you have to do this. It's your turn now to be the king. And Bharat's in the Ramayanas, he went into the forest to find his brother and to see if he could persuade him to come back, because he doesn't want to sit on this throne and enjoy this throne that comes at the expense of his brother's exile. But what he says to his guru, he says to them, I don't know how you're thinking about this and whose benefit you were thinking about when you asked me to take the place of my brother as on this throne. He says it's Shoka Samaju Raju. That for me this is a throne of sorrow, Shoka. This is a rule of sorrow for me. So I'm not, you're not thinking of my benefit. From my perspective, this is suffering. This is painful, because what it means is that I'm not going to be with my brothers. Lakhana Ram Siya Pada Binu Dekhe. If I sat on this throne, that's it. For 14 years, I'm not going to see them again. So this is Shoka Samaj. This is a throne of suffering that you're asking me to take. And he gives some very important, some very powerful examples to explain how he feels about the fact that he can write that yes, this is an elevation for me, this is power for me, but it comes at a price of the fragmentation of my family, the breakup of my family. So Bharat also, the moment when he has the opportunity, he thinks, about his family and what it means. So power is not all important in the wisdom of the response of both of them. They look at something more important, that to be fair, to be just, not to prosper at the expense of the other, are also important values. Justice to his brothers is also important. And the final example I want to give you, and I'll do it as a question to you. Now, in the Ramayana and all the versions of the Ramayana, they seem to agree, by and large, that when Sri Ram, he learned that he would be the king, and then soon after, he learns also that he will not be the king, because his father had given this Bhajan, this word, this promise to fulfill his mother's request. And she asked that his brother be the king and he be banished. She wanted him out of the way so he would not be a threat to Bharat. And, he accepted that to be the reality. My father gave his word. I will not be king. This means I will not be king. And as important, I will have to leave my home and live live the wandering life, stripped of all possessions, stripped of my house and everything else. I have to give up my princely life and become a wanderer. But for him, the word of his father, the truth of his father's word, was the decisive thing, and he never doubted that. But in the Ramayana, there was one moment when he questioned himself. He questioned himself and said, maybe I should not have obeyed him. He had a moment of thinking, I didn't make the right decision. Maybe I should not have so quickly obeyed my father once. Anyone knows that moment when Ram doubted himself?
I can guess. It can be either when he loses Sita, or it can be when Lakshman is to be died. I mean, I'm just guessing.
No, it's a good, very good guess.
I think it may be because Dashrath was dying that time.
Dashrath that. Okay, so we have three suggestions. Perhaps when his father died, or when Sita was taken, or Lakshman was badly hurt. Any other thoughts?
Request from the community or the people?
The people wanted him to stay. We have the right answer already. It wasn't Sita, unfortunately. It should have been. It was Lakshman. When Lakshman was mortally wounded, and he held him in his arms and he thought he was going to lose him, this is when, Hanumanji went to fetch the Sanjeevani. So when he kept calling him to awake, and he would not awake, and he really thought that he would lose Lakshmana. Then he said, maybe I should not have, if this is the price, if I lose my brother, if I knew that I would lose my brother, I would disobey my father. If the price of obedience to my father's word is a loss of a family, loved family, his brother, then I would. So you got it correctly. I would not have obeyed. He doubted his decision when it came to the issue of his younger brother, because of the bond between them being so strong. So these are three revealing examples. There are so many other examples that I can give you from the Ramayana, from other texts about relationships in which the issue of family becomes important, and where the protagonists are thinking about not only about themselves but about the integrity and the well-being of the family, and they're doing so consciously, and that's what I mean by dharma parivar. By making a choice of dharma in all of these instances, it's a question of the dharma parivar. What are the values that inform the dharma parivar? So I will stop with these words and see if you have any wisdom or thoughts of your own to share about these or other examples, and we will conclude today.
How is this family relationship is maintained when you go into Mahabharata?
When we go into Mahabharata?
Yeah, when the Arjuna was asked, that faced the situation of killing his elders, uncles and all. And Krishna tells him now it is his duty to do it.
Yeah. Well, very good question. So I think when we look at the Mahabharata, we see what I would regard first of all as a contrasting example, because here you had, Duryodhana, who was not at all concerned about the well-being of the larger family unit, who put self and his own power and his own wealth and his own gain, and continuously oppressed the Pandavas for that reason. And so he provides an example of the destruction of a family because of a single person's love of power, and want to be the king of the entire kingdom, to deprive his cousins of their legitimate Right. Now my second point, which goes, I hope, to the question you are asking, is that there are instances, and this brings me to the issue of dharma. However you look at the Mahabharata war, but there are also instances when we are challenged, and if the challenge is of such a nature that the larger good of the community is threatened, the common good is threatened, right? Because of, in other words, you cannot put your allegiance to the family. The allegiance to the family should not be contradictory to ethics of virtue. And if there's a conflict there between fundamental ethical values and family allegiance, you have to go for the well-being of the larger community, the common good. So Arjuna's problem in Mahabharata was not that he was not a non-violent person. Arjuna was not a pacifist. But Arjuna, faced with this conflict, where he had to take a stand against family members who were on the wrong side, he was trembling. He wanted to back off from this. And this is where Krishna's instruction becomes important. Yes, the dharma parivar is important, but not if it contravenes. The family is important, the parivar is important, but not if it contravenes the well-being of the larger group. That's why, we would say nepotism is wrong, right? Because it damages the public good. Someone says, no, what is wrong with nepotism? I'm looking after my family. But you may be in that process hurting the loka sangraha. So it comes back at least twice in the Bhagavad Gita. Sri Krishna uses this term to Arjuna. He says, Arjuna, loka sangraha mevapi sampashyan kartumarasi. In all of the choices you make, whatever they are, family or otherwise, keep in mind the universal common good. The loka sangraha. That becomes the ultimate norm for making our decisions. Not how it affects, the small unit, but also how it affects the larger well-being. And loka is a very inclusive word, as you know. It is not anthropocentric. It's not only about the well-being of human beings. Loka means every living being. And also loka includes the world of nature as well, the natural world. One has to consider that in everything that one does. And this was Krishna's, the gist of Krishna's argument. Yes, please.
One part of the story of Krishna that bothers me sometimes when I think about it, maybe it shouldn't, is this end of where he lets his whole family fight and
everyone comes to. There's no good ending there. That's right.
Yeah, right.
It's true.
Intellectually, I'm told that's because they're not good people. Make some comment on that, because that's
it's a good question. The end of the Mahabharata is a very tragic end.
Yeah.
You're right. Even the Pandavas, they all journeying to the Himalayas, and they die one by one. And there's a very interesting discussion there. I think what I take from it is basically, that even when war sometimes becomes necessary, at the same time, everybody pays a high price for violence. That even when one has to stand and fight, one should never rejoice in violence, because the outcome of violence is always suffering at some level or the other. So it's a kind of a caution about too quickly using. This is why I think, in the Mahabharata also, we mustn't forget that violence or the war, if we take the war literally, was presented as the last option. Every attempt, I mean, lots of attempts were made to solve this problem peacefully. Only when there was no peaceful resolution, then war became. But even so, we should never fight a war with joy in our hearts, or with hate or enmity, because the outcome is always never one that is people die, people suffer long term. Yes.
And also about Yadavas, end of Yadavas. That's also a very tragic in my mind.
Yes. And I mean, yes.
And
It's not black and it's not. It's a lot of it. A lot of the issues are grey. That's the messiness of war. I think that's true. But we have to sort of ponder these examples, and I think maybe the Mahabharata presents those examples to us, to sort of encourage our own ethical reflection. Bhagavad Gita says, that all actions are fraught. We can never control all the outcomes of the action that we perform. All actions have sometimes unintended consequences. We can only calculate so much, but we can never control fully or predict the outcomes of. So when we embark on any kind of activity, especially when we embark on violent activities, please know that the outcomes there you will never control. Okay. So I'll just come.
You could also
please
look at it from the point of view of universal value and absolute value.
Mm-hmm.
You beautifully described the value of parivar, and the love, affection, caring, concern for every member of the family. But that does not mean that universal value needs to be absolute at all the time.
Yeah.
For example, as a physician, if you come to see me with a point tenderness in the right lower quadrant at the McBurney's point, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Even though non-violence is a universal value for me, I still have to crack open your belly and take the inflamed appendix out to protect your life. So one universal value trumps the other value. So I understand that war should be the last one, and that was the best choice. But under the circumstances, Dr. Sri Krishna felt that war was the right approach in that particular situation. So that's the way I looked at it.
Good. Thanks, Rajesh. कायेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियैर्वा बुद्ध्यात्मना वा प्रकृतेर्स्वभावात् करोमि यद्यत् सकलं परस्मै नारायणायेति समर्पयामि असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्यो